The Duke's Enchanted Bride Part 3. Chapter 16, The Grove of Truth. The veiled glade had granted sanctuary. But truth, real truth, did not sleep beneath moonstones or lie still in sacred waters. It pulsed, restless, hidden in roots and echoes, waiting to be faced. And tonight, it called her by name. Madeline awoke just before dawn, the stars still clinging to the sky. The glade was silent but not empty, the kind of silence that hummed with presence. Something tugged at her. Not with force, but familiarity. As if a part of her she didn't know was missing had begun to stir, urging her forward. She rose without waking Brandon, who slept near the altar, one hand still curled protectively near his sword. He looked peaceful in the starlight, a moment of stillness before the world demanded more of him. Of them both. Barefoot and cloaked in a shawl of soft night air, Madeline followed the stream that wound through the glade, deeper into the forest, until it vanished beneath a fallen tree and reappeared on the other side, where the trees parted. There, nestled in a ring of flowering trees, lay the Grove of Truth. It was unlike anything she had seen, or felt. The moment she stepped into the circle, memories that were not hers flooded her mind. She gasped and fell to her knees, the earth warm beneath her. Visions unfurled behind her eyes. A woman in silver robes, dark hair braided with starlight, standing at a council table, defying kings. A burning castle. A child hidden in a basket of glowing cloth, passed from hand to hand beneath a blood-red moon. And the final image, that same woman, standing in the very grove where Madeline now knelt, hands pressed to the earth, whispering words into the roots. They will bury our names. But not our magic. Not our truth. Let her find this when she is ready. Let her remember. Madeline's fingers dug into the earth as power surged through her. And then, from the center of the grove, the ground cracked open, not violently, but reverently, and a single crystal prism rose from the roots. It hovered mid-air, spinning slowly, humming in perfect harmony. She reached out and touched it. And the grove exploded in light. Suddenly, she was no longer in her body. She stood in a vision, real, vivid, searing. A woman stood before her. Tall. Proud. Her presence luminous with strength. Madeline. The woman smiled. My name is Alia Celestra. I am your mother. Madeline couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. If you are seeing this, then the time has come. The council has destroyed our house. Our names have been struck from every scroll. But magic cannot be erased by ink or decree. You are starborn, not only by blood, but by fate. The woman stepped forward, her projection flickering with starlight. They will lie to you. Call you cursed. Dangerous. They will make you doubt yourself. But you are not their mistake. You are our legacy. The vision shifted again. Flames. Screams. Alia throwing up a shield around a young child, Madeline, as soldiers closed in. I gave my life to give you yours, her mother whispered. So rise. Not as a girl who runs, but as a woman who commands. Take back the truth. And never bow. The vision faded. The crystal dissolved. And Madeline collapsed, weeping, not from pain, but from something deeper. Recognition. Brandon found her kneeling in the grove just as the first light of dawn broke through the trees. He didn't speak at first. He just walked to her, knelt beside her, and placed a hand on her back. She turned to him, her face wet with tears, and smiled through the grief and wonder. I saw her, she whispered. My mother. Brandon's expression softened. What did she say? That I'm not a mistake. She leaned into him, and he held her tightly, their breath fogging in the cool air. I understand now, Madeline said. Why they fear me. Why they tried to erase me. Brandon didn't need to ask. She radiated the answer. Because you're not just powerful, he said. You're proof. She pulled away, face calm and resolute. We go to the capital next. They'll kill us, he said gently. Madeline looked up, and in her eyes burned the dawn. Then let them try. In the heart of the capital, in a cold chamber carved from black marble, 7 hooded figures watched as a magical scry-orb flickered. An image of Madeline in the grove of truth shimmered, her hand touching the prism, her power awakened. She knows, one hissed. She's claimed her birthright, another whispered. And from the shadows, Seraphina Duskmore stepped forward, her eyes glowing with contained fury. Then it's time we remind her what happens to those who challenge the gods. Chapter 17, The Fiancée's Gambit. In war, there are battles fought with blades and fire. And there are battles won in whispers. Seraphina Duskmore had always preferred the latter. While the starborn girl ran through woods and chased prophecy, Seraphina stayed in the capital, working. Not with soldiers or spells, but with a weapon far more precise. Scandal. Within the gleaming marble halls of Valebridge Hall, the political heart of Eldoria, rumors spread like rot through ripe fruit. Madeline Dawson, the girl who glowed, the so-called witch consort of Duke Brandon Vine, was now openly declared a traitor. She had evaded capture. She had burned part of the Grand Archive. And most damning of all, she had supposedly bewitched a duke into rebellion. But none of that mattered as much as what came next. Seraphina had carefully timed the announcement for the height of court gathering, when every noble's heir and dowager aunt and high-collared advisor would be watching. She wore mourning black once more, symbolic, somber, theatrical, and clutched a white handkerchief as she stepped before the assembled lords and ladies, her head bowed. My lords, my ladies, she began, voice quivering just enough. I did not want to speak of this. I had hoped the Duke's unfortunate attachment would burn itself out. But now, I must speak. For the sake of the realm. For the sake of the child. A collective hush swept the room. Child. Seraphina raised her chin. I am with child. The Duke's child. Conceived before he fell under magical seduction. Before he was led astray by the witch who now bears his name like a crown of fire. The room erupted. Not in outrage, not yet, but in something more dangerous, pity. And beneath pity, judgment. The daughter of House Duskmore, noble and dignified, now cast aside. With child. Rejected for a seamstress turned witch. And if the child was real, or even believed to be real, then Brandon's union with Madeline could be framed as not only illegal, but morally monstrous. A nobleman abandoning a mother and heir for a forbidden affair. That would unite the council faster than war. Exactly as Seraphina intended. The missive reached Madeline and Brandon 2 days later, delivered by Hawke as they approached the outskirts of Hollowmere Tower once again. Brandon read it in silence. Madeline stood beside him, watching the color drain from his face. Then he handed it to her. She read the words, elegant, perfumed, perfectly poised, and for the first time in weeks, her hands trembled. I have not forgotten you, Brandon. You gave me a promise once, and I gave you something far greater in return. A life. A legacy. I do not wish to see you fall. Return to court. Stand beside me. Reclaim your place before all of this is beyond undoing. You need only say the word. Your child deserves better than exile and infamy. Seraphina Duskmore. Madeline looked up. You never told me. Because it's not true, Brandon said sharply. She blinked. You're sure? I haven't touched her in over a year. Not since before Windmere. Not since I met you. But if the court believes it. She's playing the long game, he muttered. If she can't kill you with swords, she'll kill you with ink and gossip. Madeline folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. I knew they would lie. I didn't think it would still hurt. Brandon stepped forward, cupping her face. Madeline. Listen to me. There is nothing in that city I want more than what I already have, you. But if it's true. It isn't. His voice was steel. But his eyes held shadows. Because doubt, like poison, didn't need to be believed to do damage. It only needed to linger. Back in the capital, Serafina watched the nobles circle around her like flies around honey. Already, she'd received 5 proposals of alliance. 2 offers of formal marriage contracts from minor lords hoping to bind themselves to her future heir. Her campaign had begun to reshape the court's sympathies. But the real prize wasn't sympathy. It was division. She knew Brandon Vine. Knew his honor. Knew how deeply he bled for the people he loved. And she knew Madeline Dawson, too, how fragile even the strongest girl could become when the world whispered that she didn't belong. She poured herself a glass of red wine and stared at the High Council tower. They won't last, she said to herself. Not once the kingdom begins to believe it's their fault it's falling apart. That night, Madeline stood alone at the edge of a cliff near the Hollowmere Tower, stars spinning overhead. Brandon approached silently. You haven't spoken all evening. Madeline didn't turn. Because I'm trying not to scream. He moved beside her. I know you said it wasn't true. I believe you. But, her voice cracked. There's a child in this now. An innocent. If it's real. It's not. But what if the realm believes it is? What if every time we stand together, they see not love, but betrayal? He touched her shoulder. Then let them look. She finally turned to face him. Brandon, if this becomes war, if they make you choose between your honor and me. I already chose you. And if it costs you everything. Then I will build something new. With you. Her eyes searched his. But fear had teeth. And doubt had begun to chew at her edges. For the first time since she'd stepped into her power, Madeline felt herself falter. And the forest, always watching, held its breath. Chapter 18, The Forsaken Wedding. In Eldoria, royal weddings were not just unions of hearts. They were weapons. And Serafina Duskmore was about to use hers like a dagger. 2 days after the rumor of her pregnancy had swept through the kingdom like wildfire, Serafina Duskmore announced her engagement, not to just any suitor, but to the man she claimed had betrayed her. Duke Brandon Vine. The proclamation was posted on temple doors, noble house columns, and market squares from Greymoor to the outer provinces. Accompanying it was a royal seal and a public invitation. All of Eldoria is welcome to witness the restoration of order and the safeguarding of the noble bloodline. The wedding would take place at the Crown Cathedral in the heart of the capital, a site of divine blessing and political might. The message was clear. Brandon was expected to submit. Madeline was expected to vanish. And Serafina would win, not by blade, but by spectacle. She's forcing your hand, Elias warned, pacing the stone study of Hollowmere Tower. If you don't appear, the court will claim you're unwell. Or mad. Or under a witch's thrall. She's cornering us with ceremony, Brandon muttered, scanning the scroll. If I show up, I legitimize her claim. If I don't, she steals my legacy. Elias turned to Madeline. And if you appear? She'll burn me at the altar, Madeline finished, folding her arms. But her voice was steady. Brandon looked at her, brow furrowed. You're not seriously considering going. I am. You could be captured. Only if I let them. In the candlelight of Hollowmere's war room, Madeline laid out a dress, a gown woven not of noble velvet or gold-threaded lace, but simple starlight silk. Sleeveless. Hooded. Cloaked in shadows and shimmer. She sewed enchantments into the seams. One to hide her face in low light. One to veil her voice. One to mask her heartbeat from magical detection. Elias watched with something like admiration. "You intend to crash a royal wedding," he said. Madeline looked up with fire in her eyes. "No," she said. "I intend to end it." The bells of the Crown Cathedral rang out at dusk. Guests packed the pews, nobles in jeweled collars, foreign emissaries, robed priests, and watchful guards lining every aisle. The stained glass windows glowed crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. Seraphina stood at the altar in a flowing gown of obsidian silk, her golden hair pinned with blood-red rubies, a veil trailing behind her like spilled ink. She looked radiant. She looked victorious. Only Brandon had not arrived. The whispers began. "Is he late? Is this a statement? Has the starborn girl done something?" The high priest, visibly flustered, stepped forward to stall, beginning the ceremony with prayers. Then, the doors slammed open. A lone figure stepped into the cathedral. Cloaked. Hooded. Moving slowly, gracefully, down the central aisle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guards stiffened. Several nobles stood. Seraphina's eyes narrowed, lips tightening behind her veil. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." The figure reached the center aisle. Stopped. Lifted her hood. And revealed Madeline Dawson. Not in chains. Not hiding. But radiant, golden brown curls spilling down her back, eyes aglow with defiance, her exposed shoulder bare and her starborn mark blazing in silver fire. "I object," she said, her voice ringing through the cathedral like thunder. Dead silence followed. Then, chaos. Seraphina stepped forward, veil flung back, fury etched in every line of her face. "You dare." "I dared to live," Madeline cut her off. "To breathe. To love. And I dare now to speak the truth." Brandon entered through the side door, flanked by loyal guards of Greymoor, men and women who had left their noble titles behind to follow him. He crossed the cathedral floor and stopped beside Madeline. "She speaks for both of us," he said. The high priest looked faint. "This is sacrilege. This is a farce," Brandon finished. "This marriage is built on lies. On deception. On a false claim of a child that doesn't exist." Seraphina's face twisted. "I am carrying your heir. You are carrying ambition. That's all." Madeline stepped forward. She raised her hand. And the entire cathedral shimmered, as if the light itself bent around her. Her magic rippled outward, revealing truth spells. Masks shattered. Enchantments crumbled. Half the nobles wore veils of illusion, and now their true allegiances showed. Some bore the mark of the Ashen Circle. Gasps turned to screams. Guards drew swords. Nobles turned on one another. The cathedral erupted into panic. Madeline and Brandon stood in the center, untouched, the eye of the storm. She turned to Seraphina one last time. "This was never your wedding," she said softly. "It was your funeral." Elias's illusion spells cloaked their exit as they vanished into the shadows, leaving behind a wedding ruined, a court in chaos, and a city no longer certain who wore the crown of truth. In a quiet grove outside the city, Madeline stood with Brandon beneath the stars. "I think I just started a war," she whispered. "No," he said, taking her hand. "You started a revolution." Chapter 19, The Lover's Exile. They didn't run. They rode. Past the watchtowers of the capital. Past the screaming nobles and collapsing cathedral. Past everything they had once called home. By the time night fell, Madeline Dawson and Duke Brandon Vine were no longer fugitives. They were something else entirely. Exiles. Symbols. A threat crowned in fire. The first night after the ruined wedding, they stopped at the edge of the Eastern Divide, a wide valley of broken rock and twisted trees that once marked the border of the Old Kingdom, long before the council rose. Few traveled here anymore. The roads had turned to moss, the bridges to bone. As the fire crackled in their camp, Madeline sat wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, watching the stars emerge one by one. She hadn't spoken in hours. Brandon sat across from her, sharpening a blade that no longer gleamed with courtly polish, but with the edge of survival. When he looked up, her expression stole his breath. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She looked empty. "Say something," he murmured. She didn't. So he stood and walked to her, crouching at her side. "We did what we had to do." "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Then why do you look like you lost?" Madeline turned slowly. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the pain of everything she could no longer hold back. "Because I loved the kingdom," she said. "Even when it hated me. I believed if I could show them truth, they'd listen. But they don't want truth. They want a story. And they already chose the villain." Brandon reached for her hand. "You are not the villain." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But I'm no longer the girl who thought love could fix it." At sunrise, they burned Brandon's last banner. The emerald green of House Vine, once flown proudly from the towers of Greymoor, now curled and blackened in the flames. He watched it go without flinching. "They've already stripped my titles," he said. "My seat on the council is gone. My lands have been claimed by my cousin. The courts have named me rogue and dishonorable." He glanced at her. "They've taken everything. Except you." Madeline's gaze didn't waver. "You knew that would happen." He nodded. "And I would do it again." She took a long breath, then stepped forward. From her satchel, she withdrew a scrap of silver blue silk. Carefully, she pressed it into his hand. It was a crest. A new one. 2 stars, intertwined. A crown split down the middle. A single thread running between them, unfinished. "What is this?" he asked. "Our house," she said quietly. "Not by blood. By choice." By the third day, others had begun to find them. A young knight from the borderlands, disillusioned with the council. A merchant's daughter whose sister had vanished after being accused of magic. An old man who once served the last starborn and had hidden in the forest ever since. They came quietly, in 2s and 3s. Bearing no flag. No name. Just hope. And to each, Madeline said the same words. "We are not starting a war. We are starting a future. Not to replace the throne, but to restore what was stolen. You will not kneel to me. You will stand beside me." And they did. Brandon watched her grow into the role the world tried to burn from her, not a queen, but something more dangerous. A leader. A legend. A truth no one could silence. That night, in a makeshift tent beneath the ruins of an old temple, Madeline finally let herself breathe. She and Brandon lay side by side, cloaked in furs and silence. He reached for her hand. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The court?" He shook his head. "No. I miss the boy I was, who thought he could fix it from within." She looked at him. "Do you regret leaving it all behind?" He turned to her fully. "I don't regret anything that brought me to you." And then, for the first time in days, she smiled. In the tower of the High Council, Seraphina Duskmore paced a ring of black marble, fury humming in her bones. "He should be dead," she hissed. She should be ashes. A robed figure in the shadows bowed low. We underestimated the people. They are watching her now. Some are even following. She spun. Then we will remind them why the starborn line was erased. We will show them what happens when light rises without permission. Madeline and Brandon didn't hear those words. They were too busy building something new in exile, one spark, one oath, one vow at a time. And beneath their hands, the realm began to tremble. Chapter 20, The Awakening of Power. The rain came just before dusk, cold, heavy, cleansing. It swept down from the high cliffs, carrying with it the scent of stone and lightning, a storm unlike any the valley had seen in years. And in the heart of that storm, Madeline Dawson stood alone. The week since their exile had passed like a blur of motion and murmurs. Their small encampment had grown, from a pair of fugitives into a quiet, defiant resistance. A circle of healers, ex-guards, former scholars, and forgotten mages who had once served at the fringes of court now stood beside her. They called her Lady Starborn or the Glimmer Mark. She corrected them, again and again. "I'm not royalty," she said. "I'm proof." But despite her strength, despite her steady voice and growing command, a pressure had begun to build in her chest. It crackled beneath her skin. Magic danced at the edge of her vision, like a current she could no longer contain. Elias had warned her it would happen. Starborn magic doesn't wait for permission. It breaks, it burns, it becomes. The more you hide from it, the harder it will be when it finally reaches for the surface. He had offered her spells of containment. Old words. Arcane circles. She refused them all. "I don't want to control it," she'd whispered. "I want to understand it." Atop a bare hill overlooking the valley, Madeline stood barefoot in the storm. Rain soaked her tunic. Her hair clung to her cheeks. The wind tore at her shawl like wild hands. Below her, Brandon stood watching, alongside Elias, and a half-dozen of their growing loyalists. "She's gone too far out," someone murmured. "She should come back." But Elias only folded his arms. "No," he said. "She's not in danger. We are. If she succeeds." Madeline closed her eyes. She reached inward. And what she found was not peace. It was a storm. An ocean of starlight and fire, churning with memory, grief, fury, and promise. She dropped to her knees, hands pressed into the earth. "I am not a curse," she whispered. The birthmark on her shoulder blazed to life, burning silver-hot against her skin. "I am not your shame." Thunder cracked overhead. The clouds pulsed once, and then split. "I am not afraid." The magic rushed upward, through her arms, her spine, her blood. "I am awake." Lightning struck the earth, not just once, but 7 times in a perfect circle around her. And Madeline rose from the center of that light, no longer drenched, no longer human-shaped in power. She glowed like a star. Her eyes turned gold-white. Her veins shimmered beneath her skin. The air around her hummed, vibrating like a chord plucked by the gods themselves. Brandon stumbled backward. Elias fell to one knee. The others gasped, shielding their eyes. In that moment, Madeline wasn't simply wielding magic. She was magic. The hill around her disappeared. Madeline floated in darkness, surrounded by constellations. Before her stood a woman woven from stars and shadow, Alia, her mother, reborn in memory. "This is what they feared," Alia said. "Not your strength. Not your light. But that you would one day see yourself clearly." Madeline reached for her hand, but the vision faded. And she came crashing back to the hilltop, falling to her knees in the mud. The glow vanished. The storm broke. Only silence remained. Brandon ran to her side, kneeling, pulling her into his arms. She was shaking, not in pain, but in awe. "I saw her," Madeline whispered. "I became what she was." "You were beautiful," he breathed. She looked up at him. "No," she said. "I was terrifying." That night, the camp sat in hushed reverence. Some knelt. Others wept. A few began drawing symbols of the starborn into the dirt, into their tents, onto their blades. Elias entered the tent where Madeline rested beside the fire. "You've crossed a threshold," he said. "I know. There's no going back now." She looked into the flames. "Good." He sat beside her. "They will send hunters. Mages. Assassins. This time, not to contain you, but to end you. Let them come." He studied her, then spoke softly. "Do you know what you are now?" She didn't hesitate. "I am the beginning of something they cannot erase." Within a sanctum lit by black flame, Seraphina knelt before a circle of cloaked sorcerers. Smoke swirled above their heads, showing the image of Madeline glowing on the hilltop. One of the figures rasped, "The prophecy unfolds." Seraphina's voice was low. Controlled. "Then we must break her before she becomes more than a symbol." A second sorcerer whispered, "She is already more." A third hissed, "Then let us prepare the blade that ends legends." Back in the valley, Madeline stood atop the hill once more. The storm was gone. But in her hands, a new kind of storm had been born. And she would never be small again. Chapter 21, The Trial of the Crown. The mountain pass to the capital lay draped in winter. Frost clung to the stones like breath held too long. A silence hung in the air, unnatural and waiting, as if the land itself held its tongue in fear of what was to come. At the foot of that pass, just before the first mile marker of royal territory, stood a blackstone arch, the official boundary between law and rebellion. And here, Madeline Dawson made her stand. She arrived not with an army, but with truth. Behind her stood Brandon, silent and steadfast. Elias, robed and watchful. And nearly 100 followers, mages, outcasts, former guards, midwives, tailors, scribes, not soldiers, but believers. On the morning of the equinox, they erected a temporary outpost, a ring of enchanted stones, wards for protection, and a central tent crowned with a silver-threaded banner bearing no crest. Because this was not a siege. It was a challenge. That afternoon, Madeline sent a rider into the capital carrying a sealed message for the High Council. "I, Madeline Dawson of Windmere, descendant of House Celestra, claim the right of the trial of the crown, by bloodline, by exile, by truth. You may summon your evidence. I will summon mine. Let Eldoria choose. Let the people hear. Or be remembered as cowards who hid behind shadows while a new age was born." MD. The message reached them before nightfall. And by dawn, the council responded. They accepted. In ancient Eldorian law, a relic from before the council ruled, the trial of the crown was a public hearing, once used to resolve disputes over succession, heritage, and truth when bloodlines were in question. Rare. Sacred. Dangerous. It had not been invoked in over 150 years. It demanded that both parties present their truths before the court, the mages, and the people. If the ruling class found the evidence valid, they were bound by ancient law to act upon it. If not, execution. In the days leading up to the trial, Hollomir's outpost became a beacon. Messengers arrived under moonlight. Refugees came out of hiding. Magic users burned their old false identities and spoke their names aloud for the first time in years. And still, Madeline didn't smile. She trained every morning with Brandon, sparring not just with weapons, but with her power. She worked with Elias to reconstruct what was lost in the archive fire. She meditated in the starlit circle until her skin buzzed and her mind burned. She didn't seek revenge. She sought clarity. Because the council would not fall to fire and fury. It would fall when the truth stood taller than fear. The tent was quiet. Brandon poured wine, his hand shaking slightly. "You should sleep." "I can't," Madeline murmured. He handed her the cup. "You could still run. We could leave now. Disappear into the northern wastes. Start over." She turned to him, her gaze steady. "If I run now, they'll chase someone else next. Another girl who heals without permission. Another boy who glows when he dreams." She touched the mark on her shoulder. "I won't pass that fear to someone else." Brandon cupped her face. "Then I will stand with you. No matter what tomorrow brings." They didn't kiss. They just leaned their foreheads together, their breaths steady, hearts aligned. And outside, the stars blinked their ancient approval. The trial of the crown was held in the open-air hall of the Stone Rings, a wide circle of marble columns and tiered benches, once used by kings, now forgotten beneath centuries of silence. But today, it was full. Every noble house had sent a representative. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder with advisors and spies. Commoners pressed against the gates. Even the distant royal family, nothing more than ceremonial figureheads now, watched from a gilded balcony with unreadable eyes. At the center of the stone ring stood two platforms. One bore the seal of the High Council. The other, blank. Madeline stepped onto that empty platform, her cloak trailing behind her like starlight. Serafina Duskmore stood on the opposite side, robed in shadow black, flanked by council mages and masked enforcers. Between them sat the stone table, the ancient slab where the truth would be laid bare. "I speak first," Serafina said smoothly. "By ancient right and current authority." The crowd hushed. She stepped forward and summoned a crystal sphere, and within it, illusions bloomed. Images of the archive fire. The burned codex. Her scorched dress. Her trembling voice. "This girl is no heir. She is a criminal. She destroyed the Grand Archive. She has bewitched a nobleman. She gathers radicals. She practices unsanctioned magic." Then she turned, and her voice broke, perfectly. "And I mourn the child I lost. A child I could have given this kingdom. But was stolen, by her chaos." Gasps echoed through the crowd. A few sobbed. And Serafina bowed her head in silence, letting the lie weave itself like silk. Then it was her turn. Madeline stepped forward. She carried no illusions. No crystal spells. Only a single worn book and a memory crystal salvaged from the ashes. "I am not a noble by paper. That was burned." She held up the crystal. "But I am a legacy. That can never be erased." She placed the crystal on the table. Elias whispered the activation spell. And then, it played. The vision of Alia Celestra, recorded by the grove itself. Her words. Her face. Her defiance. Her blessing. Gasps turned to silence. Even the oldest nobles leaned forward. Madeline finished, her voice quiet but unshakable. "I do not ask for a throne. I do not seek revenge. I came only to say this: I exist. And I will not apologize for surviving. If that makes me dangerous, then your fear is not my fault. It's your confession." The council did not speak that day. Instead, the presiding magister stood. "We will deliberate." 7 days. Cries of outrage rose. But the law was law. Madeline was escorted out of the hall under watch, though not in chains. Not yet. Brandon waited for her at the steps. You were brilliant. I told the truth, she said. Then they'll kill you for it, he replied. Unless I rise anyway. As they rode back to their outpost, Madeline looked over her shoulder. Not in fear, but because the storm she had awakened. It was now inside the city walls. And no one could cage it again. Chapter 22, The Starborn Rebellion. The truth had been spoken. And though the council had not yet delivered its verdict, the people already had. They whispered her name not in fear, but in reverence. Madeline Dawson. The girl who glowed. The seamstress who stood before the crown. The starborn who survived. And what began as a whisper became a roar. In the alleys of Greymoor, a candlemaker with a crooked spine enchanted her flames for the first time in a decade, and when the guards came to arrest her, her neighbors drove them out with kitchen knives and boiling oil. In the southern province of Thale, 2 young weavers inscribed the symbol of the starborn, 2 stars and a thread, onto their shop door and began healing children in secret. In the northern mines, where magic-blooded workers had long been branded and silenced, a miner called Renik stood on a broken crate and shouted, "If the girl from Windmere can speak, then so can we." That night, 3 guard towers burned. What followed was not war. It was awakening. In cities and villages across Eldoria, the magical commoners rose, not in rage, but in unity. They stopped hiding. They stopped kneeling. They came into the streets singing the old names, the ones banned by the council. And at the center of every banner, every symbol, every whispered vow was Madeline. She had not asked to be their leader. But she had become their hope. From the safety of their outpost beyond the capital's edge, Madeline watched the rebellion unfold with wide eyes and a weighted heart. "They're using my name," she said quietly, clutching a flyer that had reached them by hawk. It read. She stood before the council. So now we stand before the world. The starborn people. Brandon sat beside her, reading a second note. 7 towns refuse the council's taxes. They're calling themselves the freeholds of the flame. Elias stood at the window, brow furrowed. This is no longer a legal trial. It's an uprising. Madeline turned to him. I never asked them to fight. You didn't have to, he said. You showed them how. On the 5th day of the council's silence, a girl barely 12 years old arrived at the outpost on horseback, covered in dust and determination. She didn't speak at first. Just held out a cracked wooden amulet. Madeline took it gently. It was carved with the starborn crest. They burned my sister alive, the girl whispered. She healed a dying dog and they said it was dark magic. Madeline knelt. What's your name? Cressa. Where is your family? I don't have one. Madeline closed her eyes. And when she opened them, she stood tall. Then we are your family now. And we will burn for no one. Back in the capital, the council chambers trembled, not from earthquakes, but from panic. Reports poured in hourly. Magical uprisings in 5 provinces. A courier found bearing letters of loyalty to Lady Starborn. Royal battalions retreating under pressure from villagers who refused to surrender their marked children. One member of the High Circle stood and slammed his fist into the marble table. This is no longer a trial, it's a rebellion. And Seraphina Duskmore, watching with narrowed eyes, whispered. Then let it be one. And let us crush it with blood. By the 7th night, bonfires were lit across the realm. They could be seen from mountaintop to mountaintop, like a chain of defiance. People gathered to sing, to tell stories, to remember that once, long ago, magic had been a blessing, not a burden. And at the heart of the largest fire stood Madeline. Not as a queen. Not as a martyr. But as a seamstress who had stitched her truth into the stars. I don't want a crown, she told them. I want a future. They shouted her name so loudly, the stars themselves seemed to echo it. Starborn! 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 It was no longer a girl's story. It was a people's rebellion. The council would call them dangerous. History would call them brave. And Madeline? She had become something the kingdom could neither deny nor destroy. She had become inevitable. Chapter 23, Seraphina's Fall. Even as the rebellion spread and the people rose, Seraphina Duskmore did not waver. She did not plead. She did not negotiate. She did not retreat. Because Seraphina didn't believe she was losing. She believed she was the only one left with the will to win. The Ashen Circle, the hidden sect of sorcerers who had whispered in Seraphina's ear for years, had long promised her power. They gave her forbidden spells, cloaked in shadows and secrecy. Taught her rites long outlawed, and showed her how to bind her life force to cursed magic, a dark force drawn from the oldest voids beneath the realm. And in return, she offered them her loyalty, and her soul. Now, she offered them a final command. Give me the spell to kill a starborn. They warned her. It will cost you everything. She smiled, lips pale. It already has. The next day, a messenger arrived at Hollowmere Outpost bearing a white banner and a royal seal. The message was simple. The council will meet in secret to offer terms of surrender. One representative. One witness. Come to the ruins of the old Solen temple, unarmed. We will end this peacefully. It smelled of a trap. But Madeline knew the war wouldn't be won with armies alone. She turned to Brandon. If I don't go, they'll say I was afraid. If you do go, you may not return. She nodded. Then promise me you'll keep building. Even without me. He caught her hand. No. Not without you. The ruined temple stood alone in a field of forgotten stones, swallowed by vines and wind. Madeline arrived at dusk, wearing only her cloak and the necklace her mother once wore. Her power hummed beneath her skin, alert but quiet, listening. The temple doors creaked open. Inside, candles burned low. And standing alone in the center, wearing a cloak blacker than pitch, her eyes rimmed with shadow, was Seraphina. There were no council members. No witnesses. No guards. Just two women who had once been promised the same future, now staring at one another like mirrored opposites. Seraphina did not smile. She extended her hand, not in greeting, but in command. Kneel, she said. Madeline didn't move. I came to speak peace. There is no peace for creatures like you. Madeline's gaze hardened. Then let there be truth. Seraphina raised both hands, and the cursed magic ignited. It spilled from her fingers like tar-black lightning, streaking through the air with a sound like screaming wind. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't human. It was devouring. Madeline lifted her arms, conjuring a golden shield of starborn light, not to strike, but to hold. The two magics collided, and the temple shook. Stone cracked. Windows shattered. A howl tore through the ruins. But Seraphina wasn't finished. She whispered the forbidden words the Ashen Circle had branded into her bones. The curse grew stronger. It began to consume her hands, her arms turning dark, veins swelling, eyes glowing with unnatural fire. Madeline shouted, "Stop! It's turning on you." But Seraphina only screamed louder. I would rather be consumed than forgotten. The dark magic flared, but instead of striking Madeline, it turned inward. The curse rejected its master. Because Seraphina had cast it from hatred, not truth. From powerlust, not legacy. And cursed magic obeyed only one rule. It feeds until nothing remains. Her body twisted, her scream became a shriek of rage and fear as the darkness she once commanded devoured her from within. Skin turned to ash. Eyes faded to smoke. Her cloak fell in tatters. And then, where Seraphina Duskmore once stood, there was only a crater of black stone, and a ring of dying flame. Madeline stood over the place where her greatest enemy had fallen. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for peace. She could have chosen better, she said softly. Brandon arrived moments later, breathless. She tried to kill you. She tried to kill the truth. He pulled her into an embrace. And the truth survived. Far away, cloaked figures watched the flames in their scrying pools. She is stronger than we knew, one whispered. She will not stop, said another. A third voice hissed from the dark. Then we must prepare for war. But Madeline was no longer running. She had outlived her enemies. And the kingdom, at last, would have to face the fire it had buried. Chapter 24, The Binding Vow. The war was not over. The council had not surrendered. The rebellion still burned across Eldoria. But for one night, in the stillness between storms, Madeline Dawson found peace. And in that peace, Brandon Vine gave her the vow that would change everything. High in the hills beyond the Hollowmere ruins stood a lone star tree, a rare and sacred tree believed to bloom only once every generation. Its silver-white blossoms shimmered even under moonlight, and its roots were said to respond to magic, growing only where deep love or sacrifice had taken place. No one had seen it flower in over 30 years. Until now. Madeline had wandered to it at twilight, guided by something wordless inside her, not a vision, not a spell, just a quiet pull. The moment she stepped beneath its wide boughs, the blossoms bloomed. Petals drifted around her like snow. And behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. Brandon stepped beside her in silence. He didn't kneel. He didn't offer a ring. Instead, he held out both hands, palms up, bare, and looked into her eyes with quiet certainty. You were never mine to claim, he said. But if you'll choose me, I vow to walk beside you until every star in the sky goes dark. Madeline blinked, and the magic in her veins surged, not with danger, but balance. Her emotions had always stirred her power, joy, fear, grief, fury. But this? This was different. This was Anchor. His voice grounded her. His presence calmed the wild rhythm of her magic. Her hands stopped trembling. The light in her skin steadied. And in that moment, she knew. He wasn't asking her to be small. He wasn't trying to tame her. He was choosing to stand with her, no matter how far she rose. She stepped forward and placed her hands in his. Then I vow this, she said. When they write the story of this kingdom, they will not say I rose alone. As they spoke their vows, the star tree responded. Its petals glowed silver blue, and a single vine reached down from its highest branch to wrap gently around both their joined hands. The air shimmered. Their magic, hers raw and celestial, his quiet and rooted, braided together in a visible thread of light that bound them in a silent, ancient rite. Not marriage. Not ceremony. A binding vow older than any law, sacred among the starborn. A promise made in power, not parchment. Equal. Eternal. Chosen. They sat together beneath the tree afterward, her head on his shoulder, his cloak around them both. The wind rustled the petals above. Neither spoke for a long time. Then Madeline whispered, "You make me less afraid." Brandon kissed her temple. "No. I just remind you who you are." And in the distance, magic pulsed through the land like a heartbeat. Because with their vow, Madeline's powers were no longer spiraling or unstable. They were finally anchored. And the realm itself could feel the change. Chapter 25, The Enchanted Bride. The war had not vanished. But for the first time, it had paused. Because something stronger than rebellion stirred in Eldoria. A quiet beginning. A healing. And at the center of that hope stood a bride in silver, crowned not by title, but by choice. They gathered in the Grove of Light, a sacred place where old magic ran like veins through crystal trees and soft golden moss blanketed the earth. The grove had not welcomed ceremony in centuries, it only opened itself to unity, to truth. But on this day, it welcomed them. Madeline Dawson, daughter of a forgotten name. Brandon Vine, a duke no longer bound by crown or council. Together, they stepped into the circle. Not with pomp. Not with procession. But hand in hand, in silence. The guests stood in a wide circle, no pews, no throne, no division. Healers from Windmere. Mages once hunted by the council. Knights who had dropped their banners to follow hope instead of law. Even former enemies stood among them, nobles who had once feared her, now standing with eyes lowered, changed. Elias performed the rite, not as a high mage, but as a friend. He held no scroll. He spoke no elaborate incantation. Only the truth. Let this be not a wedding of power, but of peace. Not a claim of rule, but of right. You were enemies. You were exiles. But today, you are something new. Madeline wore no crown. Her gown shimmered with soft starlight, the thread humming faintly with the quiet magic of her ancestors. A silver ribbon was tied at her wrist, the same thread her mother once wore. She carried no bouquet. Instead, she carried a single glowing seed, gifted by the star tree, a symbol not of lineage, but legacy. When Brandon saw her, he didn't breathe for a moment. She wasn't royal. She wasn't perfect. She was real. And enchanted in the only way that mattered, not by spell, but by love. They spoke simply. Madeline. I choose you. Not for safety. Not for salvation. But because with you, I remember who I am. Brandon. I choose you. Not to guard, not to claim. But to walk beside, through storm, through flame, through every breath after this. The grove glowed faintly, magic responding not to force, but to truth. The earth beneath them warmed. Petals fell from nowhere. A hush swept the gathered witnesses like a blessing. They kissed. And the grove answered. Across Eldoria, something shifted. In Windmere, children with flickering fingers were no longer hidden. In Thale, guards removed the old magic banning placards from town gates. In the capital, the council sat in silent chambers, now watched carefully by the very people they once ruled. And from every village to every city, the people whispered. Did you hear? She married him. The starborn girl. The Duke. They said it was beautiful. They said it felt like magic waking up again. Madeline Dawson had been cursed, hunted, erased. But now she stood in light, no longer alone. She was no longer just a girl. She was the enchanted bride, bound not to a throne, but to hope itself. And though their story had not ended, for now, they lived. Happily ever after.
Across every empire, every forgotten age, stories still whisper. If this tale stirred your spirit, leave a like to honor the echoes of the past. Share your thoughts in the comments. Every voice weaves a new legend into the sands of time. And subscribe to our YouTube channel Historical Fantasy Stories, where myths walk beside history, and every discovery changes the world. The next forgotten legend is waiting to be found.